Hello everybody, welcome back. It's your girl Mimi. I'm so glad you guys could join me today for yet another reading from The Stone Witch of Florence. If you are joining me for the first time, hello, you have stumbled upon a book reading. This is the second video. Please don't start with this one because obviously it won't make any sense. We started reading this book going by weeks, but last week. So we are starting in chapter 4 today. So if you have no idea what this story is about, never heard it before, please go watch my first video and get caught up on what the story is about. And then by the time you make it to this video, you'll know exactly what's going on and you'll be able to follow along a lot more easily. So, because I give like a synopsis of like what the story is about and things of that nature. I also give my disclaimer that I am not a native Italian speaker. And there's obviously lots of Italian in this book. Names of places, people. I try. I really do. I try. I don't always hit the mark, but I am trying. And I'm sure that by the end of the book, probably, I will have a lot of these names and these places spot on. So until that point, be nice. Be nice to me in the comments, please, if you happen to be a native Italian speaker or are just fluent in Italian. I really am trying. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Chapter 4. Occhio Malocchio. 1333. City of Genoa. Ginevra remembered vividly. The golden strings pulled her, connecting her back to her past self. She was no longer 28, a woman of advanced age. She was 13, and her mother had made her a new dress to replace her old one, which was so worn out it wasn't any good, even for a poor girl. "Keep it clean," her mother said. "It'll have to do until you're married." Ginevra vowed to be careful, and then went away, beaming to show off her new garment to the world. Her reverie was shortly interrupted by a tug at her hem. It was a beggar girl, whose lip was twisted up so her front teeth showed. She held on tightly to Ginevra's dress and thrust out her empty bowl. Another day, Ginevra might have run home and found an old piece of bread, but today she fretted that her dress would be soiled by the girl's dirty hands. She pulled it away pointedly and kept walking, casting a curious glance over her shoulder at the girls sitting in the dust. Their eyes locked. Ginevra's breath caught in her chest. She looked away and continued onward. Early the next morning, Ginevra put on her new dress and found it unbearably itchy. So itchy, she regretted her old one had already been torn into rags. Doing her best not to scratch all over, she began her daily journey to draw water from the public fountain. At the little square where it burbled, she stubbed her toe so badly that the nail broke in half and bled. "Porco Dio," she muttered, and then clasped her hand to her mouth. It was an extremely rude curse that only sailors would say. She'd never dared to blaspheme even a little before. She looked around to see if anyone had heard, then carried on with her task, filling the heavy water jug and limping toward home. On the way, dogs that normally kept to themselves chased her, and she only just escaped by throwing her jug at them, where it shattered on the ground. Camiola, displeased that a perfectly good jug was ruined, let alone that she had no water for the day, combed Ginevra's hair so roughly that the comb caught in a snarl, and a whole lock was pulled out. Clutching her head and squirming around inside her clothing, Ginevra hurried to the home and shop of her mentor in search of solace. She huffed her way into Vermilia's room, expecting her immediate sympathy. But the old woman was hunched over a low fire in the hearth and appeared to be muttering at the orange stone on her ring. "Ahem!" coughed Ginevra. "You are early," said Vermilia, not turning around. "Tell me what you are saying to that stone." "It is I who give directions here. Get to your work and leave me be." Vermilia went back to her muttering. Cowed, Ginevra tried to focus on her chores, preparing nettles to be boiled and wine for men who could not satisfy their wives. But she was so clumsy that the plant's vicious hairs stuck all into her hands. She fanned them in the air for relief, but then her stomach itched, and she jerked quickly to scratch it, knocking a cup of wine down the front of her new dress. Tears welled up in her eyes as a purple stain spread across the gray fibers. Vermilia finally stopped muttering and hid the stone among her robes. She turned to her pupil. "And what's so wrong with you today?" Ginevra's bottom lip trembled with the effort of keeping a neutral face. "Since this morning, I have lost my toenail, my mother's water jug, and a chunk of my hair. I was chased by vicious dogs, and now I have stained the only new dress I have ever gotten, which has grown tight and coarse overnight. Have you ever heard of a more terrible day?" "Yes," said Vermilia. "Is that all?" Ginevra turned away brusquely. As she moved, the palm of her hand caught on a rough spot of the table, and a large splinter broke off painfully in her flesh. "You see," she cried, brandishing her new stigma, "I have been cursed." Vermilia looked at the wound and pressed a thoughtful finger to her lips. "Ginevra, tell me what you know." She closed her eyes, the exercise now familiar. "I know that bad people are rich, though I, who am worthy, remain poor. I know that I am beautiful in my new clothes, but uglier girls receive praise. Enough!" She picked up a shallow wooden bowl and filled it with water, placing it on the table between them. "Ginevra, go and dip your fingers in the olive oil." Ginevra stopped, sniffling. She knew this ritual. It was requested by those whose livestock sickened and died for no reason, whose gardens would not grow, young men who became suddenly impotent, women whose hair fell out after they argued with a neighbor. "You think it's that?" "Shh! Just do as you're told, girl." She dipped her stinging and bloodied hand in the oil jar, and then let 3 golden drops fall from her fingertips into the water. The two of them peered into the bowl and saw the spheres of oil sink to the bottom and join together, a distinct globule intact under the surface. "Porcio Dio!" said Ginevra again. Vermilia sucked in air through her teeth. "The drops sink and do not spread." She lowered her voice. "Someone has set the malocchio on you." "The evil eye? How did it find me? Is it here now?" Ginevra jerked her head around the room, straining her eyes to see into the dark corners. "It is here, and it is not," Vermilia answered. "This you know. It roams the earth and takes jealousy and pride as its bedfellows. It is everywhere. It is nowhere." "Why do you mock me by speaking in riddles?" hissed Ginevra. She tried to pick the splinter out of her hand, but her efforts only dug it in deeper. "Did you hear me, old woman? Or have your ears grown too hairy? Be quiet, rude thing. The malocchio makes you speak so, which means we must make you laugh. Are you ticklish?" Vermilia reached out with both hands and poked her under the arms. "Don't touch me, crone!" shouted Ginevra, recoiling. You become senile in your unnatural age." Vermilia only rolled her eyes in response. "And you become stupid in your anger and forget what I've taught you." Some small corner of Ginevra's mind shook itself free of the bitter, swirling cloud, and she remembered her lessons. Laughter could deflect the eye's gaze, scare it far away. "Tell me a joke, then, so I can laugh," she managed. "But do not touch me again." "There's a good girl. Unfortunately, the only ones I know are about fornication, and you're too much a virgin to find those funny. But let me ask you this. Have you recently purchased fish from Casoli Paracrotti?" "Is this the beginning of a joke?" "Well, have you?" repeated Vermilia. "No! Why do you care what my family eats for supper?" "Because that man is a jettatore." The awful word caught Ginevra's attention. "You mean Sir Paracrotti, who always has the big pink shrimp?" "Yes. The shrimp are a trick. Jettatori are almost always charming, successful in business. So your guard is down, but misfortune comes to all who go near him. A jettatore looks at you, and you feel a cold that seeps into your soul, into your bones." The eye itself was not so uncommon. Ginevra knew. It could be thrown by anyone who felt spite, anger, jealousy. People were always coming to Vermilia, putting their fingers in oil, and then being told the excellent jokes about fornication until the eye ran away. But a jettatore? This was a person born inhabited by the eye, and whether they were angry or not, anyone caught in their gaze was plagued by greatest misfortune. No simple trick of laughter could send away the eye if it came from a jettatore. So, Ginevra, if you haven't visited Sir Paracroti, then have you made somebody jealous? A neighbor? She started to shake her head, but then remembered the girl with the twisted lip. A guilty pang poked through her anger, and Vermilia felt it. Tell me. There was a girl. Her face was disfigured. All I did was look at her. You know better than to stare at somebody's misfortune. At least, did you look at her with kindness? Offer a bit of food? A prayer? Ginevra looked down at the floor. Wicked girl! You have made it worse for yourself. This we cannot solve with jokes. What would inspire your gentle heart to provoke a deformed child into throwing you the eye? I didn't mean to provoke her. I was just surprised by a dirty beggar. There you go again. You, who eats farro soup on earthen floors. One frumpy new gown, and you speak badly about one who has even less. Keep it up. That's what the eye wants. But Ginevra was barely listening. She was trying so hard to hold back the vile things she wanted to say and do that she was overcome by a fit of hiccups that convulsed through her body in painful spasms. Please, I cannot. Porcio Dio, said Vermilia this time. If we can't chase the eye away, we have to puncture it, and it does not forget a stabbing so easily. I do not care. Get it away from me. Very well, if that is your choice, said Vermilia gravely. She picked up 2 large needles and handed them to Ginevra. Poke one through the hole of the other and repeat. Holes through sight, eyes against eye. Envy breaks, eye burst and die. Through her ghastly hiccups, Ginevra repeated the verses, and after pricking her fingers numerous times, threaded one needle through the other. Vermilia took the needles from her and stabbed them 3 times into the water bowl. They watched together as the large drop of oil floated to the surface and dispersed. Vermilia muttered a prayer of thanks. Ginevra vomited all down the front of her dress. Chapter 5. Mano Figa. 1333. City of Genoa. The next thing Ginevra knew, she was waking up on Vermilia's little cot. The light was fading, and she felt sick and thirsty, as if she had swallowed sea-water. She tried to sit up, but her vision shrank to a pinpoint, and she froze, midway up, waiting for the blood to come back to her head. Vermilia heard her stirring and came over to the bed. Ah, good. Welcome. Here you are again. How long have I been asleep? Through last night, and a whole day besides. What? My mother— It is well. Be calm. I sent word to your parents. They know you are here. Come now. She helped Ginevra prop herself up and handed her a steaming brew of fennel fronds in a wooden beaker. Drink this. It will make your mouth feel clean after all the filthy things it said. Ginevra clutched her face and groaned. It's all right, dear girl. You are not the first, and you shall not be the last to catch the eye. Ginevra looked at her friend's face, lined all over from the decades of kind smiles and understanding eyebrow raises she gave her clients, free of charge. Her friend, who had plucked her from a fish-maid's daily drudgery and shared with her secrets and stories nobody else knew. Your ears are not really so hairy, she offered. Vermilia laughed. You know, you were right about that one. I plucked them while you slept. Still, I should not have said it. I will never give another person reason to throw me the eye. I'll always be humble, and never care about my clothes, and never think badly of anyone. A nice promise, but one impossible to keep, even for the worthiest of hearts. For you, it will be even harder. The skills you possess, the eye covets them, and it will not forget how you punctured it. It will always be looking for you. How do I stop it from finding me then? Ginevra said, afraid and exhausted. Hush. Breathe deeply of the fennel, and I will tell you a story while your head clears. Ginevra put her face down close to the top of the beaker and sneezed at the spicy steam. Vermilia began. In the time of the pagan gods, there was one called Phorcys, who lived in the sea and ruled over the monsters of the deep. Instead of legs, he had 2 spiny fishtails. Instead of hands, he had 2 slippery fins. Phorcys had a beautiful daughter called Medusa, whose finest feature was her hair, which she tossed about in everyone's face, showing it off and always seducing men with it. Ginevra touched the spot where her own hair had been pulled out the previous morning and found it still tender. She pushed it harder, accepting the pain as punishment for her vanity. Eventually, continued Vermilia, she decided she wanted to lie with a god. So she went to Neptune, who was king of the oceans, and showed him her beautiful hair. He desired her so greatly that he took her to the closest place with some privacy, which happened to be a holy temple, and there they enjoyed themselves for many hours. But it was not so private as they thought. The goddess Minerva, who owned the temple, saw them. Minerva was a famous virgin, and was furious to see such lewd behavior. So, to ensure Medusa would never again lie with man or god, Minerva changed her wonderful hair into writhing snakes, and made her lovely face as ugly and frightful as any demon from hell you see painted on the ceiling at San Lorenzo. She became so ugly, in fact, that any man who looked at her would turn to stone. And what of Neptune? How was he punished? He was not, because he was also a god, so could do as he wished. That seems dreadfully unfair. I agree, but this is not the point of our story. After Medusa was transformed into the hideous monster, she went and hid in a dark cave at the bottom of a mountain, because she could not stand to see herself. Many men tried to kill her, but she turned them all to stone with her gaze. This went on for some time until a half-god called Perseus decided to try his luck. He crept into Medusa's cave while she was sleeping and carried a shield with him, polished shiny like a mirror. He walked up backward to Medusa and only looked at her reflection in his shield, and this way he was able to cut off her head. This is how the Malocchio was born. When Perseus cut off her head, he released her evil gaze out into the world, and that's why it's everywhere now. But he also gave us a way to protect ourselves from it. On his way home, Perseus saw a woman chained up to some rocks in the ocean, about to be gobbled up by a sea serpent. He went to rescue her, but to make sure his Medusa head was not ruined, he put it on a bed of soft seaweeds for safekeeping. Did he save the maiden? He did, and they got married. But that is not the point of our story either. The point is that while Medusa's head was sitting on the seaweed, blood dripped from its neck, and the plants became red and turned to stone. And sea nymphs saw them and were delighted, and planted their seeds all over the ocean. And this is how coral was born, from the blood of the Medusa. So, corals are the blood of Medusa? Exactly. And this is why I buy a coral from your father, and why it helps to keep the eye away from things it might want to curse, like babies, or sailors, or successful businessmen. The eye is drawn to coral, but then cannot stand to see its own blood and ugliness. It flees when confronted with its own reflection. I need to wear a coral now, said Ginevra, understanding. I can do that. Lots of people do that. It's so much easier than never thinking ill of anyone. I'll fashion it in the shape of a cross, and this way Christ will protect me as well. Ah, Ginevra, the eye is older even than our God. It's not intimidated by Christian symbols. The chantings of clergy are not relevant to it. This is why my business is always constant. People become ill. They pray to saint this or saint that, but after, they sneak here late at night or early in the morning to make sure the matter is attended to by someone who does not ignore the other methods. What I mean to say is, instead of a cross, what you really need is this." She pulled a small package from her purse on her belt and handed it to Ginevra. Ginevra untied it carefully and drew out a long black cord. Dangling from the end was a piece of fine coral, red as ox blood, carved into the shape of a tiny hand clenched into a fist. The thumb was shoved between the pointer and middle fingers. It was the mano figa, a notoriously rude gesture representing intercourse, an instigator of tavern brawls for thousands of years. The mano figa hung from the cord so its phallic thumb pointed down into the earth. The wrist was capped with a gilded bezel embellished with symbols Ginevra did not know. Shells, nuts, and fruits, delicately traced by some ancient engraver. She held up the strange and wonderful object. It was now quite dark inside Vermilia's house, but the coral pendant seemed to emit its own light. Ginevra saw each finger was capped with a perfectly carved nail, tiny veins webbed at the back of the hand, covered by wrinkles and folds of flesh, so exquisitely wrought that it seemed a real living hand, and not a carved jewel that swayed, pendulum-like, at the end of its cord. Vermilia broke the almost holy silence. "Like I said, the eye can't take a joke. Now, when it goes after you, it will instead be drawn to the red of the coral. But once it sees you've tricked it into looking at the rude figa, it will be very offended and leave." Ginevra was captivated by the pendant's precise beauty. "Where did you find it?" she asked. "A goldsmith owed me a favor. I visited him while you were sleeping, and, lucky day, this is what he had. A drunk pilgrim pawned it and never returned." "This is for me?" Ginevra said, in complete disbelief that someone of her low station might claim such a jewel as their own. "The goldsmith must have owed you a really big favor." Yes, he did," Vermilia beamed. "He lived bloated and puffed up like a toad for 2 years until I managed to deflate him. Now, put it on and listen to me." Here she gripped Ginevra's face with both of her hands. "This is a true amulet. You can see how it glows. The power is potent. It is stronger than the new corals your father fishes, than anything I can make. It was blessed by spells that are long forgotten, secret words, sacred strokes of the graver's knife that modern hands cannot imitate. But there are 3 things you must remember about this amulet. First, while you wear it, you are safe from any mischief the eye might wish to cause you. It cannot reach you, not even when cast by a jettatore. Second, so long as you wear this, disease cannot enter you. Third, and most important, nothing is infallible. Do not attract the ire of men and women. They do not need the eye to be evil, and may harm you the same as they harm anyone else." Ginevra nodded solemnly. "Good. You understand. You will pay attention to it. How its color and its temperature change. When other magic is about, or when it is protecting you from something unseen, like the malocchio or an illness, it will glow hot and red. When there is danger it cannot deflect. It will become pale and cold, and you should know to run away. And for all this, you must wear it always, even when you sleep. Now that you pricked the malocchio with your needle, it will be waiting for its chance at revenge. So keep the coral tucked under your clothes, against your skin." "Under my clothes, against my skin. Always, always," she said, still staring, transfixed. She placed it over her neck and realized that her life up to this moment was before, and now it was after, and it could be glorious if only she stayed within the benevolent light of this magnificent jewel. When Ginevra was fully recovered from the malocchio, she went back to where the girl with the flawed face had been, hoping to make amends. But she was nowhere to be found. She had missed her chance to be kind. Chapter 6. The Wisdom of the Pear Tree. July 6th of 1348, outside of Florence. Ginevra pondered these early days, the terror of her encounter with the eye, the ecstasy of Vermilia's precious gift of coral, as she wandered through the disease-ravaged countryside with the orphan Piero. The more she thought about it, the more disappointed she became in herself. Vermilia had invested so much in her potential. So had many others. And what had Ginevra made of their gifts? Nothing but to become a mediocre and lonely woman. She looked over at Piero, who trudged beside her. He caught her glance and smiled, picking up his step. Never mind the past. Never mind these black thoughts, she told herself. You are going to make it all right now. Motivated by the unexpected lack of provisions, the pair had made good time and were close to their destination of Florence. Now, an acute anxiety invaded Ginevra's mind. She was about to see a man who had made love to her and then left her to rot in prison, and there were a few things she needed to say to him. She began to invent entire conversations in her head in which Ludovico, astounded by her wit, begged forgiveness for his transgressions. She wondered, for the 100th time, if his wife had died, and if that was what this was all about. She wondered again why a powerful man like Bishop Acciaiuoli was begging for an audience with her, especially after he'd so carefully orchestrated her exile. So when they reached the river Arno before the city proper, she told Piero to make camp, even though the Porta San Gallo into Florence was just another hour's walk. She needed one more night to think. Please, Ginevra, can't we go in? I'm sick of sleeping on the ground and eating only old prunes. Be grateful for those prunes, Piero, replied Ginevra, who was just as sick of them. It's best to wait for morning. The gate might be closed for the day already, and we'd have to walk all the way back to avoid sleeping next to the rubbish piles outside the wall. Piero harumphed off into the surrounding brush to find sticks for a fire in the gathering dusk. Ginevra sat against a tree and watched the brown waters of the Arno swirl past them. A body bobbed by, and she shut her eyes against it. She opened them again and saw a beautiful pear tree growing out of the rocky riverbank that she had not noticed before. It was covered with white buds tipped in pink. She breathed deeply, and a light perfume filled her with calm. Pear trees were wise. They knew the answers to women's troubles. She walked to the tree, and the buds opened into fragrant blossoms. She touched a branch, and the delicate petals closed, swelling into golden pears. The tree was speaking to her of love that ripened over time. Ludo had asked her back to Florence, and she came. They were bound to each other, still, by the golden strings. What joy! What relief! The sound of water dripping on rocks pulled her attention. The corpse she had seen earlier crawled out of the river and stared at her pear tree. She yelled at it to go back in the water, but her voice came out only as a faintest whisper, and the corpse did not listen. Instead, it reached into the branches and plucked a golden pear and swallowed it whole. It did this again and again until every single fruit was gone, and then it shook the branches. It took the branches in its mouth and sucked the leaves off of them until they were barren sticks. With a bloated belly, the corpse slid back into the river and floated against the current toward Florence. She woke, to Piero shaking her. The sun rose red. There was no pear tree on the riverbank, and no corpse had crawled from the water, but the dream's message was real enough. However he may have felt about her, Ludo was long dead, and Ginevra was a fool for thinking otherwise. She grabbed Piero close and wept bitterly into his shoulder. Poor Ginevra. Chapter 7. The Beloved Relics of Florence. May of 1348. City of Florence. Several months earlier, at first news of plague, the Florentines did what they had always done in moments of great peril. They organized an emergency procession of the Virgin of Requisti Mm-mm. Requisiti, sorry, the holy statue that served as a protectress of the city. Time and again, in exchange for gifts and prayers, the Requisiti statue had saved the people of Florence from famine, floods, and invaders. But this time, she did nothing. Unmoved by the procession of the faithful, she allowed disease to enter her city, potent and unhindered. The Florentines began to die in heaps, the same as everywhere else. They put the Virgin back in her cupboard. They must have asked too much of her over the years. It was only fair to give her a rest and cast their hopes toward the next holy object. And so, with stubborn optimism, the people of Florence turned their attention instead to the left arm of San Filippo Apostolo, a gift to the city from the Queen of Jerusalem. This exceptional relic was a forearm and perfect hand with 2 fingers pointed skyward. It was housed inside a precious reliquary casket of silver and enamel and stored in the main altar of the octagonal church known as the Baptistry of San Giovanni. The Florentines adored their Filippo arm because, once, a sick goldsmith touched it and instantly became well. Normally, pilgrims flocked into town on San Filippo's feast day, bringing a cash influx much appreciated by local businesses. But in the desolate spring of 1348, those few who came from the countryside were stopped at the city walls. By then, the gates of Florence were closed to all foreigners, a late and feeble attempt to halt the contagion. The poor pilgrims, who had traveled so far for nothing, could only place their hands on the wall's exterior and hope the prayers of the Florentines would be sufficiently pleasing to Filippo. The pilgrims were uneasy about this arrangement because Florentines were not exactly known as the most pious of peoples, for all their churches and priests. Really, they were a city of bankers and merchants who were not hesitant to indulge in luxury. They wore velvet robes embroidered with silver pomegranates and pinned pearls into the hairdos of their brides. The sexes bathed together in public bathhouses, naked except for fancy hats. Men who could not govern 3 snails were admitted to the highest offices through bribes and nepotism. Women wore 2 colors at the same time. Worst of all, they lent money with terms of accrued interest. This was probably why their virgin statue was ignoring them. Still, on Filippo's day of May the 1st, those Florentines who remained alive processed toward the baptistry and the Filippo arm for a communal confession of sin. They walked in small groups, standing far apart and casting angry glances at one another when a member of a different household stepped too close. In normal times, this important mass was led by the Bishop of Florence himself, a position now held by Angiolo Acciaiuoli, uncle of Ginevra's former lover Ludovico. But today, the bishop was preoccupied. The King of England had declined to repay his loans to the Acciaiuoli Bank. The amount the king owed was, itself, ruinous. Worse still, word had spread of these royal defaults, and the other powerful, and often violent, account holders of the Acciaiuoli Bank had demanded the immediate return of their funds. The bishop's father and brother promptly died from the stress of it. Now, the heavy burden of saving family honor and fortune rested solely on the bishop's holy shoulders. In this way, the pestilence had been a gift to Angiolo Acciaiuoli. As death rode through Europe, disrupting all rhythms of daily life, the bishop finally had time to think. His full focus was now trained on refilling his coffers before the disease ran its course, and before his creditors returned their attention to their bank accounts. With the bishop on hiatus, the Mass of Filippo was led by a newly ordained priest who until recently made his living as an olive oil salesman. The best substitute the church could get, what with all the qualified clergy being dead. The whole thing was awkward from the start. The priest spilled the wine, he dropped the host, and when he held San Filippo's reliquary aloft, he couldn't get it open. A cantor came forward and helped the anxious priest pull it apart. Something fell out, and both men gave a little yelp. Instead of the gilded forearm of a saint, a small glass bottle lay upon the altar. It was the size and shape of a spring onion, the cork sealed shut with wax and filled with a violet liquid. The astounded cantor picked it up and held it out for all to see. For a moment the sanctuary was silent. Then distressed shouts of, "Where is the arm?" and "He has abandoned us, just like the Virgin," echoed through the sacred space. Everyone rushed out of the church, and many citizens who meant to stay in Florence left that very night. As they fled through the gates, they told the wall-touching pilgrims what had happened, and they, too, ran away, telling everyone they met the terrible story of how a sorcerer had transformed San Filippo's arm into a small bottle. Those Florentines who did not, or could not, flee were left in even greater terror, and cast their desperate hopes toward the upcoming feast of San Zenobio. If no miracle was delivered after that, well, they whispered, then we are truly cursed above all other cities and forsaken by God. In life, San Zenobio was the very first bishop of Florence. Now, his skull was enclosed in a gilt silver case, fashioned in the shape of his head, hat, and shoulders. And surely, he would intercede for Florence in her darkest hour. A sparse crowd of Florentines, faces wrapped in vinegared cloth, gathered at his altar inside the crumbling cathedral of Santa Reparata to ask Zenobio to make the plague go away and tell the Virgin that they were sorry and get San Filippo to come back. Notable among the attendees of the ceremony were the Lord and Lady Girolami, who were rich as Croesus and claimed Zenobio as an ancestor. As was tradition, the Girolami family had processed to the cathedral from their imposing tower home in order to receive the saint's head on a gilded tray. Again, the bishop Acciaiuoli excused himself, leaving the ceremony in the charge of an inexperienced replacement, this one a notary public by training. And when the nervous young priest removed the silver head reliquary from its locked altar, the two halves cracked apart in his hands like a walnut. Instead of Zenobio's skull, out fell a small glass vessel, closed with a cork and filled with liquid of palest sage green. The priest stuttered with fear. The people fell on the ground and wept. The Girolami ran away and locked themselves up in their tower. Somebody went to the Ringhiera, the stone platform in the central piazza, and yelled out that the saints of Florence had abandoned the sinful city to plague. Only one or two people were there to hear him, but it was enough. The terrible news floated with the poisoned miasmas through shuttered windows and sequestered courtyards until it reached the newly appointed papal inquisitor, Fra Michele de Lapo Arnolfi. The previous Florentine inquisitor had taken to his role of eliminating heretics with a bit too much zeal, and Bishop Acciaiuoli had lobbied the Pope personally to secure the nomination of the younger, more easily managed Inquisitor Michele. A native Florentine of strong faith, but delicate health, Inquisitor Michele was afraid of disease even in normal times. Terrified of stepping out of doors, the new inquisitor plunged into research, obsessively going through records of old trials, looking for anything that mentioned the stealing of relics, of sorcerers turning them into glass bottles. However, bad news soon overwhelmed his task. Every day, it seemed, new and awful crimes were shouted from the central platform by somebody. Nobody was really sure who, since most citizens remained locked inside their homes. But to the inquisitor's ears, the yelling voice was authoritative and well-informed. It shared that the altars inside San Lorenzo, San Paolo, and San Pier Maggiore had been emptied, how that Santo Stefano a Ponte, a shrine, was broken open, how, in all cases, sacred bones were taken from crystal caskets and switched for tiny bottles of unholy potion. Determined to end these foul crimes, but unwilling to risk his own health, the new inquisitor sent man after man from his personal retinue to investigate the thefts in his stead. but so potent was the plague that each of his deputies dropped dead before he could gather any helpful information. Down to his last man, Inquisitor Michel changed tactics and hired a disposable peasant to deliver dispatches to the 50 or so parishes of Florence, commanding each of them to conduct inventories of the precious relics within their charge. The peasant messenger did his best, but really, he could hardly find any people to deliver the letters to. Nearly everyone was dead, it seemed, and those left alive refused to leave their apartments. The peasant abandoned his fruitless task without a word to the Inquisitor, who waited in vain for responses that never came. When summer arrived, hot and deadly, the city canceled all future processions. The people were afraid to be near their neighbors, afraid another relic would disappear. The Signoria, the group of wealthy men elected to lead the city, ceased to meet, and municipal services were suspended indefinitely. Most churches stopped holding Mass altogether. The sickly, sweet stench of decay was everywhere. The taste of it stuck in the back of people's throats. But the shouts from the Ringhiera did not abate. Word continued to spread that a wicked thief was plucking the relics of Florence from their golden boxes and leaving strange glass charms in their place. And to heap misery upon misery, it was now apparent that if a parish was robbed of its saintly protection, its entire population would soon after be decimated by plague. The people of Florence began to call these unfortunate places dead parishes, and nobody would cross into those cursed neighborhoods for love or money. I know this is historical fiction, but thinking about the real plague, how terrifying that time in history must have been for so many people. I can't even wrap my head around that. Outside of the pandemic in our modern times, this was that. The plague was it. Like the big daddy of all big daddy bad health crises. Chapter 8. Fiorenza di Nuovo. July of 1348. Gates of Florence. Ginevra and Piero arrived at the Porta San Gallo early in the morning of July 7th, 1348, several long weeks after the fiasco at the feast of San Zenobio, and only a few short hours after the pear tree intimated that Ludovico was cold and dead. Normally, there was a long line of Florentine gentlemen standing in front of the gate at daybreak, each waiting to pass back into the city after an evening of revels in suburban brothels. But today, Ginevra and Piero were the sole applicants for entry. The gigantic nail-studded doors were shut, and it was only with much shouting that they were able to attract the attention of the keeper, who sat in his room atop the gate's tower. "Move along! The city's closed to foreigners," he yelled down once he saw them. "We have business here with His Holiness the Bishop," called up Ginevra. "Where is old Antonio?" called Piero. "He let me out of this gate 2 weeks ago, and said he would watch for my return." "Old Antonio is now dead Antonio. May his soul be at peace. I'm the new gatekeeper, young Antonio, and I'm not supposed to let anyone in." "But we have a letter from the Acciaioli family, inviting us to Florence," said Ginevra. Young Antonio paused, uncertain of the correct action. "Please," continued Ginevra, "can you have your man open the door?" "Man? I have no man. It is only me at this post. You're lucky you came to this gate and not another, where there might not be even anyone there at all." "Well, we are sorry to trouble you, young Antonio, but please, have a look at our letter. We come at the urgent request of the bishop's nephew. Piero here is the son of a Florentine, and is a resident of this city." Young Antonio squinted down from his perch. Even from the height, he could see a big official-looking seal on the letter. He did not want to interrupt the business of the bishop. Nobody was around anyway to see that he let them in, a crooked-nosed woman and her child. They seemed harmless enough. All right, hold on." The keeper climbed down the long spiral stairs from his tower, opened a little door that was cut out of the big door, and for the first time in 8 years, Ginevra saw her adopted home. She stepped through the doorway, eager to experience the same elation she had when she first entered Florence as a young girl so many years ago. But oh, desolate place! Never had Ginevra felt old before, but nothing shows time like a place once gay and full, now going to dust and shadows. Instead of the giddy excitement of her youth, she was overtaken by deep dread. She was now absolutely certain that her dream had been a portent. It was not just Ludovico who was gone. The city was so quiet she could hear the ringing in her ears, hear the plaster upon the walls, as if all its inhabitants had disappeared into the air. Gone were the fumbling customs agents, the stoic soldiers, the peddlers of trinkets looking to part you from your coin as soon as you arrived. Gone was the pastry man who sold you hot fried bread that he plucked from a cauldron of bubbling lard with his bare fingertips. Gone were the merchants' wives, flouting sumptuary laws in their striped purple gowns and ridiculous red turbans, and the country mendicant who shouted at them. Where were the vegetable sellers, with their lettuces and garlics spread on clean blankets on the cobbled streets, and the new kittens who sat on the garlics and mewed for their mother cats? Gone, gone, gone. Piero, she whispered, for it seemed strange to speak loudly in this empty space. Was it like this when you left? Not quite, he said with a shiver. There were still some people walking about when I was last here. Half the city must have died while I was away. Come, I will take you to Bishop Acciaiuoli now. Let's hope he's still alive. Chapter 9. Somebody Like an Inquisitor. June of 1348, city of Florence. At the beginning of the summer, in the days just before Piero would be sent on his errand to Genoa, a June sun blazed down onto the rooftops of Florence. The plague settled in, as pervasive and relentless as the heat, finding its way into the cracks of walls and the pores of the Florentine people. Not a drop of clarity had fallen on the mystery of the missing relics, nor a drop of rain on the parched city. During these steaming nights, the Inquisitor Michel kept his lamps burning late, flipping through records and panicking. At the suggestion of a physician, he drank only strong Spanish wine from a silver ewer and kept his room filled with perfumed smoke from a blazing brazier. Together, the alcohol and lack of fresh air pushed the normally astute man into a constant mild delirium, and in this fragile state, Bishop Acciaiuoli came to pay him a visit. It is 7 relics missing now, said the bishop from the doorway. San Barnabas' thigh bone is gone as of his feast day, June 11th. Stolen and replaced with this. He walked forward and dropped a small bottle on the Inquisitor's desk. Grass-green liquid swirled inside its bulbous base. Ah, said Inquisitor Michel, pulling his skull cap from his head and holding it over his face. I was so engrossed in my work I didn't even see you come in. The citizens are distraught, waiting for more thefts to be shouted from the Ringhiera. Who keeps doing that? Said the Inquisitor. He fingered some of the many loose parchments on his desk, as if the solution was misplaced among them. I come to speak with you, said the bishop, losing patience, because as the world crumbles around us, infected riffraff knock upon my door at all hours. They ask me where our relics are, and more precisely, what is our Inquisitor doing to get them back? Many things. First, I sent my men out to gather clues, but they all died, besides Giuseppe. So now I await responses from parishes. Also, I read and research. I can't leave my home, you understand. I was ill as a child, doing research, waiting for letters. Is that really all? I could do more if you would help me, if you would lend me some of your hired guard to watch over our churches until the thief is caught. I have no one. What good would that do? My men would die the same as yours, sitting outside in contaminated places. Look, Michel, these are hard times. Everybody is frightened. The Inquisitor said nothing. only continued to stare at his papers. The bishop sighed. If I'm being honest, it's not just the door knockers. I've received a concerned letter from His Holiness on the matter, and I wasn't certain how to respond. The Inquisitor looked up from his desk now. Word has reached the Pope already? Indeed, continued the bishop, and it seems we haven't much to tell him. But I suppose I can explain your efforts, reassure him that you're doing all you can, given the circumstances. He'll appreciate hearing some good news, no matter how slender. He wrote in some distress, you see. So many of his cardinals have died. Most of them French, of course, so no great loss there. But now I hear our lone Italian cardinal is dead also. We must pray for our departed brother in red, mustn't we? Of course. May his soul be at peace in Christ's name. Amen. The Inquisitor made a few more appeals to God on behalf of the Italian cardinal before stopping abruptly, mid-devotion. But why did the Pope not write to me directly if he has concerns? Because, as you know, it was I who requested your appointment after his last appointee turned out to be such a tyrannical disaster. He wants to make sure I chose well. But you've been doing your best, and you'll continue to do so. I'll let him know. He turned to go. Even through the warmth of the wine, Inquisitor Michel felt like a failure. The bishop was right. It was his responsibility to track down heresy, and there was no greater sacrilege than stealing relics. Wait, he cried, rather more loudly than necessary. It is clear to me. We must hire an investigator, someone familiar with sorcery, who can track the thief, interpret the little bottles. Bishop Acciaiuoli gave him a bewildered look. You mean somebody like an inquisitor? Yes. No, I mean somebody who can go into the city without succumbing to disease. No man is safe from pestilence, you know as well as I. God takes whom he pleases. No man, but look here. Once again, the Inquisitor rifled through his papers. Aha, here it is. Do you remember the rogue ward of Fra Simone de Castia? She was exiled after the water sickness of 1340. The bishop shook his head incredulously. He knew what Michel was proposing. This was not what he had intended, having two annoying people to deal with instead of just one. All he had meant by the visit was to make sure the Inquisitor was doing his job. You would entrust a woman and a convicted heretic with such an important task? Don't you recall, said the Inquisitor, she moved among the sick without ever being afflicted. It's true, it was unnatural, but she kept a book of secret spells too. It's recorded here in her sentencing. Exactly the sort of person who could explain these strange bottles. I can't see how any of this matters, said the bishop, examining his fingernails. We punished her rather severely, as I recall. Why would she travel now, in these times, to help us? Lord Bishop, wasn't she in love with your nephew? Asked the Inquisitor quietly. The bishop's silence answered the question. Well, let's have him write to her then. He is already dead, along with his father. I'm the only one left. My condolences, Bishop, but does the lady need to know that before she gets here? Acciaiuoli opened his mouth to argue further, but stopped. If this was how the Inquisitor wanted to handle the matter, fine. The woman was probably dead anyhow, and he did not want the Pope to hear he was standing in the way of an inquisitorial investigation. The relics would return, God willing, when the time was right. He had faith. So what did it matter to him who Michel hired in the interim? The bishop had more immediate problems requiring his focus. So he obligingly forged a letter in the hand of his late nephew and hired a boy, Piero di Piero, to go and fetch Ginevra. The plague had taken both the child's parents, and Piero had been moping about the piazza of Santa Reparata ever since, weeping and begging for food. It would be good for him to have something to do. He was a bit young for such a journey, but he was the only one the bishop could find that would not die along the way. Chapter 10. Fra Michele di Lapo Arnolfi. July 7th of 1348, city of Florence. And, just as the bishop predicted, Piero did not die. Still, nobody really expected Ginevra to show up from such a distance, with only a boy as an escort. So when the pair arrived at the bishop's residence just a fortnight after Piero was dispatched to Genoa, the Swiss mercenaries guarding his doors regarded them with suspicion. They conferred among themselves in their native tongue, and after a few minutes told the travelers to go meet with the inquisitor first. A tight knot formed in Ginevra's gut. "But the bishop said he'd find a position for me if I delivered his letter," Piero explained. "After you drop her off," said a soldier gruffly, slamming the palazzo doors. Piero shrugged. "Come on, Ginevra. The inquisitor's palazzo is just around the corner." "We are not expected. Someone has tricked us," she said. "I swear it was the bishop who sent me. He promised he would place me with a good family in exchange for delivering you. Come, let's do what the man says." "No, something isn't right here." "Please, Ginevra, I can't be alone anymore." She let herself be dragged to the inquisitor's door. The lintel was inscribed, "Let no man commit error in word or deed," and painted in with gold foil. The gold was peeling. "I'm going to knock," said Piero. "Wait! I need to think for a moment." He knocked. "I told you to wait!" The door opened. A neatly dressed servant stared at them. Piero looked at Ginevra and then back at the servant. Neither adult said anything, so he announced their purpose. He made Ginevra take out the letter from Ludovico. The servant stepped aside to let them in. The knot inside Ginevra wound tighter. She'd so dearly wanted the letter to be genuine she had ignored her instincts. Now she'd walked into a trap she did not understand. Piero ran back toward the home of the bishop, stopping to wave goodbye before he disappeared around a corner. She moved to follow him, but the servant pulled her by the arm into the dark interior, then shut the door. "Miasmas," he said by way of apology. Her heart began to flump in ways it shouldn't. She found herself at the shorter end of a rectangular room, the interior wall pierced by 3 windows that showed a central stone courtyard. Narrow blocks of light shone through, giving just enough illumination for Ginevra to see the walls were painted with panel scenes of the apocalypse, towers toppled by earthquakes, famine riding fast on a skeletal horse, sinners packed into a flaming kiln tended by beasts. "So, the boy, he actually found you then?" Ginevra jumped. Straining her eyes into the gloom, she saw a tall, slender figure pacing at the far end of the hall, his soft leather slippers making faint slaps on the green tile floors. "He did, but he ran away just now." "Incredible. Monna Ginevra, I am Fra Michele di Lapo Arnolfi, Inquisitor to His Holiness Pope Clement VI." He paused briefly, awaiting platitudes, but Ginevra only studied him intently. He was not so old, a few years more than herself at most, but he had the pale skin and darkly circled eyes of one who spent too much time reading by lamplight, and his narrow frame was lost in the voluminous black and white robes of his order. A black niello pomander hung from his silk belt, the size and shape of a crab apple. If Ginevra had been closer, she'd have seen that silver letters spelled out prayers to San Sebastiano around its circumference. The trinket emitted a pervasive, musky odor, and he jerked it compulsorily up to his mouth and nose every minute or so. Ginevra saw she was being observed just as closely. Automatically, she touched the scar on her nose, and then was annoyed she had pointed to the very thing this loathsome man was searching for. Her gesture broke the silence. Our deepest apologies, but Signore Ludovico died shortly after he wrote you." Ginevra's heart plunged, but she kept her face stony. This was why the pear tree had warned her, so she did not have to learn of her Ludo's death from this sickly skeleton of a man. "Sir Ludovico wrote that the bishop had particular need of my services, that I was to be welcomed back into the city." "Yes. Well, is it true that in the year 1340 when so many died from the water sickness, you went into infected houses and parishes and never became ill yourself? It is true. And is the same true with this new and vile plague? It is, so far as I know it. And I am also of the understanding that the nuns of San Elisabetta taught you to read. Sister Agnesa did, yes. Ginevra realized she had not said that name aloud in years, another pang of the heart. And that with these skills you became familiar with certain books on sorcery and unnatural arts? Ginevra stiffened. I was accused of such familiarity, as you clearly know, but that does not make it true. The Inquisitor took a nervous inhale from his pomander and spoke. Well, it's close enough, he said. What we require is a person impervious to the effects of the pestilence, who is also intimate with practices and writings of charlatans and sorcerers. Another sniff. Ginevra almost turned and fled right there. She expected to be asked about her healing skills, not interrogated about sorcery. Again. But then she remembered the lone guard at the Porta, the absent bishop, the empty streets. If ever there was a time a woman might rise above her born station, surely this was it. She must be steady, make her demands. If it did not work, she could leave whenever she wanted. There was nobody to stop her. So, she said, what would you have me do then? The Inquisitor left Ginevra's question hanging in the air and called out to the lone servant, who was named Giuseppe. The fashionable young man reappeared carrying a small, slant-top desk and set it in the center of the room. Atop, he placed a ceramic beaker painted with green and purple grapevines pecked by golden chickens. Ginevra realized she was desperately thirsty and began to say her thanks, but the Inquisitor walked to the beaker and drank its entire contents himself. Rude. He wiped his mouth delicately, then removed from the desk a little row of bottles, filled with liquids in varying shades of violet, sage, plum, and emerald. He placed them on top of the desk, and then retreated to the far side. He indicated Ginevra should come forward and examine. In your work with necromancers and witches, have you ever seen anything like these? I never worked with... Never mind. No. Flasks filled with liquid. It could be anything. She grew impatient. Why are you showing this to me? Because someone is stealing the relics out of our churches. Stealing relics? Ginevra was not sure she'd heard correctly. And whoever it is, he leaves these behind. 1 bottle for 1 relic. We thought with your background you might recognize them, which is why, aside from your fortitude against illness, Ludovico, suggested that we write to you. Sir Inquisitor, I do not follow. With so many gone, he continued, our holy spaces are not watched as they ought to be. 7 of our most precious relics are now gone, and once the relics are taken, so die the residents of the parish. I myself am one of the very few left in the parish of Santa Reparata. So, you did not ask me here to heal people? Oh, no, Mona, he said, pulling at the pomander. As we all unfortunately know, this plague is the wrath of God. Sniff. Manifesting itself on earth. The only escape is to pray for intercession from the saints. Sniff. But we can't do that because our saints keep disappearing. The Inquisitor's voice broke, and his cheeks became flush. Was he about to cry? Ginevra decided it must be the wine. Sir Inquisitor, are the relics not crusted in gold and jewels? It is not sorcerers who are interested in those, but ordinary men. You have no need for one with specialized knowledge. Ha! You have a mind for inquisiting, just like me. Ginevra did not appreciate the comparison. The golden reliquaries remain intact, in position. Only the relics were taken. Ginevra shivered. A pall hung over the city. She felt its suffocating drape when she crossed through the gate. Who would choose to be closer to such a wicked crime? But if this was the task she must accomplish to begin her life anew, so be it. What happens if the thief is not caught? He will be caught. This condition must be met if your exile is to be rescinded. Reversing my exile is a start, but it's not enough to secure my help. You ask an extraordinary thing. Name your price, then, bold woman. I wish to join the Florentine Guild of Doctors, Apothecaries, and Grocers, she said, finally voicing aloud what she had wished for 1,000 times in silence. You wish to be a grocer? Like a grocery store? He asked in all seriousness. No! I wish to register as a doctor, of course. But you are a woman. I am aware. And yet, I still wish to be admitted to the guild as a doctor, so I can practice my trade without persecution. I know it is unusual, but women may join if they pass the exam. I'll need the patronage of someone important. I thought Ludovico might... Anyway, I suppose you will have to do. Ginevra was terrible at flattery. Mona, that is not in my control. The guild decides its own members. Are you saying the guild doesn't value a recommendation from the office of the Holy Inquisitor? She was better at insults. It's just, this is a highly unorthodox request, he spluttered. Ginevra shrugged. These are unorthodox times, and I should think, judging by the emptiness of your streets and the stink of the air, perhaps that the good doctors of Florence should not turn up their noses at offered help, no matter where it comes from. Fine, then. This deal is in my favor anyhow, as it will never come to pass. If you recover our relics, I will request your admittance and provide requisite funding to the Guild of Doctors, Apothecaries, and Grocers, which they will decline, as neither your father nor your grandfather was a member. Now, is that all? Yes, that is all, plus expenses, and it must all be in writing. The obstacle of patronage was not a surprise to her, but never mind. She would sort that bit out later. Very well, then, said the Inquisitor, but it shall also be put in writing that while engaged in my services, you will not perform any doctoring, and that you must appear at my place of residence to report on progress at intervals of no longer than 3 days, the first meeting being on July the 10th. You will note my generosity in giving you the rest of today to recover from your journey. Any deviation voids our agreement, and you will face immediate criminal charges for violating your exile. Ginevra nodded curtly. Then we are in agreement. Giuseppe, come here. The Inquisitor wrote up the terms, and he and Ginevra signed their names, with the servant acting as witness. Then the Inquisitor gave her a modest sum for incidentals. He also gave her the first small bottle found in San Filippo's reliquary, and a list he had drawn of the robbed churches, and the dates and the thefts were first noticed. Ginevra examined the parchment. It was decorated with massive borders of flowers, rats, the crest of the city, and what looked like a procession of saints walking along the bottom of the page. This is very formal, Sir Inquisitor. Thank you, he said, blushing. The beauty illustrates the importance of the words. She squinted to read his perfect handwriting, the tiny names of churches cramped inside colorful borders. No wonder Florence needed her help. Their Inquisitor spent all his time drinking wine and making art. Fine, she said, tucking the list and the contract into her belt. I take my leave and will return soon. In 3 days, pressed the Inquisitor. In 3 days. I pray for your success, and for the soul of your friend Ludovico. I shall inform the bishop of our arrangement. Before she could respond, Giuseppe ushered her through the front door and locked it. She did not see Piero outside. She called out his name, but there was no answer. She started toward the bishop's home, intending to ask the boy if he'd like to continue as her partner, but then she stopped herself. Perhaps it was better this way. Piero would be sent to live with a family, with other children. She would not force him to accompany her on her crooked path. She put him in the place in her heart she kept for things she had cared for and lost, along with Ludovico, Mona Vermilia, and her original left nostril. Now, in the street alone, she was struck by the reality of her decision. She did not know how to hunt a thief. She took out the Inquisitor's list, with its lush illustrations and scant information, and then put it away again. She looked around the empty piazza, a place once lively and familiar, now distant and strange. Again, her mind went into the past, back to the circumstances of her first arrival as a girl, to the city of her heart. All right. Well, that concludes our reading session for the day. Thank you all so very much for joining me. I hope you are enjoying this story so far. I know I am. I'm enjoying reading it again. And look for me to put the next reading up probably in the next 4 days. Probably, yeah, so like Friday my time. So probably in the next few days. Because my weekend is going to be busy, so I won't be able to do it over the weekend. So it'll be a little bit of a shorter time between this reading and next reading. But anyway, until then, I hope you guys have a fantastic week. Happy MLK Day if you're here in the States and are celebrating the holiday, enjoying the day off, hopefully. And stay safe, stay hydrated, and I will see you next time. Bye.